Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. Before we hop into today's episode, I want to take a moment to, one, thank you for being a part of this community. And if you listen to this podcast, if you follow me on Instagram, if you are in my orbit at all, you are most likely a servant leader. You care about service, you care about impact, you care about doing something bigger than yourself. Otherwise, what's the point of learning all the things that we talk about on this podcast? And one of the things that I've really stepped up in as I've gotten older, but definitely as I've led more experiences domestically and now international, one thing that's become very apparent to me is the purpose and the commitment to charity. And, as I mentioned in previous episodes, I have created, and it's happening, an all men's retreat in Nosara, Costa Rica next month. And one of the 8 days that we're going to be there is completely dedicated to service. 3 different organizations that we're partnering with from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., nothing but service. One of those organizations supports underprivileged children who grow up in very harsh, violent, drug-infested environments, and these kids struggle to self-express. They struggle to dream big and wonder if their life's going to be different than what they've grown up in. And Dreamcatchers supports these children by teaching them the social skills and necessary to, one, believe in themselves, communicate, and not repeat the same patterns that they grew up in, which is massive. The second is Costas Verdes, and this is all about planting trees in very specific places in Costa Rica because of the deforestation that has happened. And because of the deforestation, their rainforest is beginning to deteriorate in certain areas. And by planting the trees that we're going to be planting at Forge in April next month, we are putting up what they call the ground troops that restrict the salt water from the ocean coming into the rainforest. And instead, this barrier of what we're planting will prevent the salt but allow the moisture that keeps the ecosystem strong and healthy. And rainforests play a huge, huge role in maintaining our weather patterns and rainfall. They're home to approximately 50% of the world's plants and animals on land, and they absorb massive amounts of CO2, which slows global warming and prevents sedimentation from reaching dangerous levels. So we're really excited about that. The third is Nosara Recicles. In Nosara, Costa Rica, there is a growing kind of challenge of what to do with the garbage. The World Economic Forum estimates that oceans now hold 150 million tons of garbage, which is absolutely atrocious. But in the province of Guanacaste, which is where we're going to be in, more than 122,000 people live in municipalities that do not provide garbage collection. Okay, so if you're in America, you live in your city, your environment, and the garbage people come pick up your trash. They don't have that. Right? So that leads families to either burn their trash, throw it in a river or a vacant lot, or take it to an open dump. And so in 2008, a group of local women decided to take it upon themselves to do something about this and started an organization called Nosara Recicles. They go around, they pick up all the garbage, they recycle all the plastics. They even have equipment where they can repurpose this plastic to build tools and items that could be used locally to, as tools or art pieces that can be repurposed rather than just cast off, right? And this organization is really, really beautiful. It's all women ran, which is amazing and something that I really, really support. And so my ask is that if you feel called to, please support us. Please donate. Any amount helps. $5, $50, $100, whatever you can afford. We'd greatly appreciate it. We have a goal of reaching $13,500 by the time we go, which gives us about 3.5 weeks at the time of this episode. So we greatly, greatly appreciate it. The link is in the bio. And again, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you being a part of this ecosystem. I appreciate you being a leader that cares about making a difference in your life, in the lives of those that you serve, and in the world at large. So on to the episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. Thank you for being here. And we're going to dive into another episode on conversations, on difficult, uncomfortable, unexpected, conversations and how to handle those, or at least how to think about them. I look out at the landscape of, I live in America, in case those listening are from other countries, and I just look around and I see a lot of conversations being avoided, a lot of things that are on people's minds that are not being articulated, expressed, that aren't being had altogether. The spaces where these kinds of conversations aren't being together. And I think part of being a leader, part of being someone who cares about the well-being of others, is the person that can sit comfortably in that discomfort and open up the door for dialogue to happen. It's when dialogue doesn't happen that things go sideways. They can go downhill very, very fast. And there's a lot of polarity in the landscapes that I see, both political, religious, even in internal families. A lot started with COVID, a lot of that. And you got to see visually what people thought based on wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. But you see this in the boardroom, you see this in the bedroom, you see this with kids, you see it everywhere, right? If you're paying attention, you can see in people's body languages, you can hear it in their tones. You can read it in their withdrawal or avoidance of hard, uncomfortable subjects. And if we don't learn how to become better communicators, that polarity and that distance that we're experiencing right now is only going to further. It's only going to go, it's only going to get bigger. That gap is going to become wider, right? And so I was talking to a friend of mine. He's been on the podcast, Chase Spillman. Shout out to you. He has his own community outside in Arizona and Flagstaff, right outside of Flagstaff, building his own off-grid community out there. It's great. I've been there. And he was telling me about, his studies and, when you're off-grid, you have a lot of, you do things differently. And he reads a lot. He reads a lot of religious texts, although he doesn't proclaim to be any sort of religion. He reads, the Quran, he reads the Bible, he reads these ancient texts. And he was telling me about an insight that he had around why a lot of wars happen, why a lot of disagreements and, just human conflict exists. And one of the main reasons is a difference in definitions, in how we see things, how we define things. One word given to two people are going to have two different experiences, right? We this, we've heard of this, but I really liked the way that he phrased it in the definition, because the definition is everything. And if we're having an argument about a word where we both have two different definitions, unless the intention is to understand both sides in definition, that conversation is not going anywhere, right? Arguing is pointless. It's wasting energy. It's deepening the roots of someone's argument. It creates an adversarial energy that wants to make someone right or wrong, and who wants to be wrong or who wants to be on the losing end. And so you fight tooth and nail for days, months, years, decades, and people only believe more of what they originally believed in the first place. So we need a new method. We need new strategies, or we need to act on strategies that we may know but don't have the courage to do, right? I was also listening to a podcast episode on the impact theory with Tom Bilyeu, and he was interviewing a CIA former spy, Andrew Bustamante. And, this guy would go undercover, and his sole responsibility would be to master psychology so that he can get into people's, lives, and they can trust him and he can get secrets and bring them back to our CIA, right? Our country, the USA. And, in order to read people, you have to understand people very, very, very well. And one of the things that they taught him in the CIA was the difference between perception and perspective. And he goes on to say that perception is when individuals live with themselves in their frame of reference, which is normal. We all do this, right? It's humans are wired for survival and self-preservation. So you're the hero of the story. Everything is about you. because you need to survive, right? And if you only stay here and only believe that what you see is reality, then you're stuck in only one, quotations, reality. The truth about reality is that reality is reality, but then we have our perception of the reality, right? Perspective is when you can get out of your own perception to see multiple perceptions. Perspective is seeing multiple perceptions. You can see the dynamics that are at play. You can see more of the blind spots. You can see how and why people have gotten to where they've gotten, which gives you greater levels of understanding, empathy, and information to make better decisions, to help more people, to do the right thing, right? And I thought that was fascinating because almost every argument is a difference in perception. Some person doesn't have all the facts, so they use that mystery to build a story so they have clarity on what happened. And when they have clarity, even though it's not true, they find reasons for it to be true. And if you go into a conversation thinking that your perception, your own perception, is the reality, then there's no other way that it could be anything different. So you have two people in an argument battling for who has the right perception. But again, that is a winless battle. It never ends. It isn't until both parties can understand that there's perception and perspective that they can get out of their own thought and emotion and identity and into a space where they can learn, understand, not necessarily agree, but at least understand enough to be able to articulate back to the person, something I got from Jordan Peterson, articulate back to the person what they are trying to say to the other person's pleasings, right? Like if we're in a conversation, I say, okay, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this, but you're saying this, that, which led to this, and now you're feeling that. The other person has to be okay with what you just said in that summarization, not what you think they said that is good, what they hear based on what you heard, which requires a whole nother level of listening, not hearing the weakness in someone else's argument so that you can get the upper hand and point out all the flaws in what they just said, making you right and them wrong, but listening beyond sometimes the words, into the posture, the tonality, the story behind the story. Because when you enter a conversation with that level of presence, in most situations, that dynamic changes the conversation. It's no longer adversarial, it's more collaborative. And when it's more collaborative, people feel safer. When they're safer, they're more likely to listen. When they're more likely to listen, they're more likely to share. The more information that's shared, the more clarity that can happen. The more clarity there is, the more agreement there is. Or an agreement to disagree, but at least you understood where both parties are coming from. And I think that if you were able to do that for both, like articulate what both people are saying and still disagree, that there's a level of respect there for the time invested and the willingness to want to learn. I've been in that situation many times where I'm like, I hear what you're saying and I love that you were honest in saying that, and you know that you have found a way to believe it and that works for you, and that's great. I don't personally believe that, but I can understand how you come to that. And if that helps you, so long as it's not hurting other people, great. You know, and then they're like, thank you. And I, you know, hey, we're not going to agree. That's fine. But like, I appreciate you at least attempting. And that's all it takes, because both parties will walk away from that conversation and carry that knowledge, that energy, that wisdom, that insight into other conversations that they have with their families, with their businesses, with their clients, with themselves. And so the whole point of this episode, there's a long list of strategies, but my point with this episode is to give you a few that have helped me over the years and continue to help me show up at my best. And my best doesn't mean to win. My best is to be present. time and time again in these conversations. And to remind those who have not heard or understood my background, I've been doing coaching and mindset training now for almost 10 years, and I've found, and really my whole life, but as a business, 9.5 years. And in that time, I've had the privilege of working with thousands of leaders all over the world, from different cultures, different ages, different backgrounds, different socioeconomic statuses, CEO down to the grassroots employee, to mom and dad, to kids 6 years old, to adults 70 plus. And I've seen a lot and heard a lot. And I hear what people say publicly, and then I hear what people say privately. And they're often differences. And my goal is to create skills, awareness, and spaces where more of what people actually think can be expressed in more of a public setting, so that we can get the truth of what people are really saying and feeling, as opposed to individuals harboring what they want to say but aren't saying, and then resentment brews, and then unnecessary aggression kind of builds and explodes, and things that don't need to happen end up happening. So I want to remove and minimize that, because, being seen, heard, and understood is one of our core desires. And one way to do that is to be the person that does that for others, but also to develop the skill to make it easier for people to understand you. And that requires a level of courage and vulnerability, which is not weakness, it's a strength, right? So I'm just going to share a few kind of mindset shifts that have helped me over the years, and I'll do my best to kind of explain. There's so many examples that you can go with, like, okay, well, what's the dynamic? Is this a business kind of conversation where you're in a negotiation, or is this a marriage that's strained and it's on the brink of divorce? Is this a conversation with, your uncle or your family member who has not honored a boundary? Like, there are so many conversations that can be lumped under hard conversations, and, not having 3 days to go over a lot of those examples, my best kind of use of time with giving you quick, usable, tactical ideas is to start with the mindset going into these conversations. We can't control what the other person does, but we can do our best to influence the space that creates the right vibe for the most information and the most engagement to be in that conversation. And I think from there, more times than not, we'll get more progress than standstill or complete avoidance. So the first thing is that I see a lot of people blame the other person. It's your fault. And the first kind of big thing that I would say is replace blame with curiosity. We're never going to know someone's true motives or the context in which something happened to its entirety. It's not possible. And so when we blame, we create an environment where fear of punishment can now be invited into the space. Nobody wants to be blamed. And in fact, most times there's some sort of quote unquote blame that could be put on both sides. It's never completely, almost ever, I won't say never. Most times it's not just one person. There are other factors, right? And when we become curious, we take the focus off of the individual as like, you're in trouble, I'm punishing you, what the heck, why did you do this? I knew you were that type of person, which is all just a heavy judgment, right? And we instead focus on what led to this. How can we not make this happen again? What occurred? Help me understand the situation. That has a better approach of working and getting us the insight or the clarity that we're looking for, that can help us make a decision on whether to leave the relationship, stay in the relationship, ask the next set of questions, or just have closure in whatever has taken place, right? We won't know those things until we create a space where that information can be revealed. And it's not going to be revealed with blame. People who are blamed can have shame. They can close up. They can lie. They can do a whole other series of things that can just murky the water even more and make it even more unbearable for both parties involved. Right? So a note here is kind of just to think like a mediator. Look for the third story. I have my story. They're telling me their story. What's a third objective viewpoint, right? Going back to the perception and the perspective, what different perspective can I take in this conversation that creates less of a charge and more of a safer space to have a hard conversation? That has helped me immensely. There have been times where clients have not done certain things that we agreed upon, or my wife has, not honored a commitment that I thought was clear, right? And it's natural in those moments to blame. Like, how could you miss this? Oh my, and that only it activates a defense mechanism naturally in the other person. And if the other person isn't equipped with the tools, one, to notice it, and then two, to self-regulate, now that energy is provoked, which is only going to make it stronger in you. And then that's where the arguing starts. And that's where both sides are not going to see clearly. Both sides are just going to stay in their own perceptions. Number 2, these all kind of stem into each other, but they're nuanced. And so I'm going more into like the detail of how I think about it. And so hopefully you can just pull apart what's helpful for you and apply it to, whatever conversation either you're going through right now or about to step into. My hope is that these insights can just be a reminder, maybe even a sharpener to what you're already doing. Number 2 is stop assuming bad intentions, judging too quickly, and characterizing people. We don't know what's inside other people's minds. We can't. But what we can do is we can question, we can listen, and we can affirm. And through doing that in a relatively skilled way / masterful way, we can deduce things that have happened. And when we clarify through the affirmation of what is said, we can read posture and read the expressions that they're giving us that maybe indicate that that's more true than false. And then we build a clearer image or a clearer picture of who the person is or what happened or what our next set of behavior action steps will be, right? So with this, when things happen and you have to have a hard conversation, you're going to have feelings about it. You're going to be concerned about how they might view you or how you view them. And if they know how you view them, it may trigger something that had happened in the past. So your feelings are going to come up. It's not about blocking those. Let those, give air to those to breathe, right? Maybe in the conversation, but definitely before. Like before you go into that conversation, really think about what is it that I'm feeling. And this is where your emotional vocab is really, really important. Like your language. How diverse is your language? Using I'm angry as opposed to I'm hurt. But not knowing, like say an example, in your emotional vocabulary, you don't have hurt there. It's just angry, happy, sad, and for lack of a better term, mad, right? Let's just say there's 4 options. You're lumping nuanced feelings into 4 major categories, which is taking away from the subtlety or the individualistic nature of what you're feeling. So the more diverse your vocabulary comes, the more accurate your description of the fine-tuned feeling that you're feeling is. Not only do you have a better quality experience, quote unquote, good or bad, but the other person understands it to a level of really solid clarity, right? So sitting there and being like, what am I feeling? I'm feeling betrayed. I'm feeling bitter. I'm feeling resentful. I'm feeling insignificant. I'm feeling jealous. I'm feeling, right? And sit there. I'm feeling lost, confused. When you express that level of honesty and that level of clarity, that begins to open the doors to the other person sharing what they may be feeling / perceiving, right? So don't let those hidden feelings block other emotions or be blind spots that can erupt in the moment. Think about it beforehand so you can go in there and when it comes up, you can recognize it, not having it recognized the first time and then, in a fearful attempt to not show that emotion or feeling or talk about it, because that would be admitting vulnerability or having them see a side of you that you don't want them to see or whatever. That could result in you just avoiding the conversation, saying something that doesn't need to be said, that hurts the other person's feelings, or blowing up in a way that doesn't need to be there, right? So stop assuming bad intentions on their end, judging too quickly, characterizing them. All that comes from how we see ourselves. Let's say a friend did something that you don't agree with or kind of took you by surprise. You may reference something that has happened to you, or you may be referencing something that is currently happening to you and projecting that experience because you haven't taken the time to reflect, projecting your experience onto your friend. People who do things like that are this, and that's how it is. Well, you only judge what you haven't really accepted in yourself, right? It's always an internal game. And characterizing someone as one thing and not a multitude of things makes it easier for you to feel about the other person. But that's not necessarily fair to the other person because you don't know the context in which whatever happened. And again, not saying that what happened is right or wrong. The purpose here is really to understand. It's not to change behavior. It's not to control. You need to do this, again, because that's right or wrong, and that's only going to further the gap. The thing is we want to understand, because through the understanding, we'll know what to do next. But if we don't understand it, that's where that mystery that stays alive gets filled in very quickly with fear and aggression and violence, usually. Fear coming from, I fear that this is going to happen. I fear that that person is that person. And so we start solidifying realities to justify that it's accurate when it's really not. We haven't taken the time to find more details. So judgments are dangerous, and they can cause us to jump to conclusions and get ahead of things that aren't real and true, but give us security in the moment because we figured it out. We know what they did at that time. Who wouldn't do that? Or, if I was in that situation, I would have done something totally different. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people have had that thought, but really, if you think humans in contexts are completely different than when they think about things in theory. It's like if I was in a different time in Nazi concentration camps. I've heard Jordan Peterson use this, and I thought it was great, so I'm going to use it here. Nazi concentration camps, I wouldn't have done those things. It's like, well, you probably would have done the same thing that you're judging right now because of the time, of the culture, of the context. And to say that you could have done something different we'll never know, but it's a way to flex moral superiority on a situation that you will never be in. All we can do is learn from what happened and in the moment do our best to not be the person that we don't want to be. And instead, in this moment, be the person that we want to be, because we only have control over what we do, what we say, how we think in this moment. Tomorrow never comes, because when it gets here, it's today. We only have the now. So we can theorize about what we would have done in the past or what we could have done in the future, but really, what are we going to do now? Right now, all I want to do is understand, to one, get closure, to become closer to you, to help, to just make a boundary and enforce that boundary, right? Like, that's really all that we can do. And so when you find yourself assuming bad intentions, when you find yourself judging too quickly, that's where you should take a breath. And I'm not saying change your mind. I'm saying take a breath, think about what you're feeling, maybe shift your perception into more of a perspective and see what happens. You may come to the same conclusion, but at least give yourself a few moments to think about it rather than just operating off default because that's what your parents did, or because that's what you did when you were 8 years old, or because you're only doing that from fear of being hurt. Don't live your life from fear. Use fear to take ownership of it and not cause you to go down a road that you don't need to go down. Number 3. This kind of has been talked about before, but I'm just lumping it into its own thing, and that's who's right versus what's right. You're right, I'm wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. No matter how thin you slice it, no one wants to be wrong. So everyone's going to fight to be right. And if fighting to be right is the goal, that's going to draw it out. The goal is what's right. What's right for what we're talking about? What's right for our company? What's right for our friendship? Not for you, not for me, our friendship, our marriage. What's right for our city, given the information we know? What's right for our country? Not who's right, who's better, who sucks, what's right. And from what's right will come what's needed. And then once we find out what's right and what's needed, then we cross-reference behaviors that fit with what is needed to get to what's right. And that could be simply explained in the beginning of a conversation that's really charged. My goal with this conversation is not to be right. My goal is to find what's right, because I care enough about you in this relationship to get to the level of clarity that I and you and everyone in this needs to have to feel blank, blank, and blank again. And so when you said that to me, I felt this. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not here to debate that. Here's what I felt. Now that may be because of this, and this, but I want to seek understanding in where was that comment coming from, and I'm personally also working on why I felt that way, and here's why I felt that way. I feel like we've been distant. I feel like you haven't been honest. I again, these are all my feelings. I feel like, since this situation happened, you've been different. And I realize that these are all my perspectives, my perceptions, and my goal is to broaden my perspective to see it from your side, right? Like that would be a way to really, a beautiful way to start a conversation. I've had, probably 5 conversations in the last 7 to 10 days that were really hard. Heart rate pumping, blood circulating very fast. I had to take breaths to slow down. My mind racing, concerned about what the relationship was going to be after the conversation. But I cared enough about the relationship, the growth, and being in values, being in alignment with my values, that gave me the courage to sit there in that discomfort and express my own viewpoint on the situation and my willingness to hear it from the other side. And there hasn't been a situation, a conversation in my life that I can think of at this moment where that hasn't been an effective strategy. Because what always comes from that, whether you get a favorable outcome in that conversation or not, is the lessons you learn while in that conversation. And listening, I think, is one of the most underrated skills that we don't utilize or talk about enough. You share your thing and then you listen. And you listen intently. Again, not to hear for weak points, but listen to understand. Listen to the words. Listen to the tone. Listen to the body language. Listen to the intuitive nudges that may be coming through. Listen to the insecurity that's coming up when that person said what they said. That's interesting. Listen to your own vocal changes when their vocals start to change. Oh, I'm getting charged. Okay, got it. Take a breath. That level of listening. What does that require? A lot of energy and a lot of presence. But because of that presence, you're going to learn a lot more. You're going to become a better communicator, and you're going to be able to solve conflict a lot faster than maybe you're currently doing. And that, to me, is a staple of leadership. And that we talk a lot about leadership on this podcast. So I hope these were helpful in how you can leverage these in any conversation that you have in the future. To kind of summarize, you can't control the people, but you can control what you bring into the situation. The difference between perception and perspective. The difference in definitions. People are always going to, initially disagree because no one has defined a common definition that people can agree upon. And maybe there can't be in certain situations, but at least attempt, because a better clarity than what currently is only going to be better for your family, your company, our country, many countries around the world. And know that this is a never-ending journey. I still get caught up in these, which is why I want to talk about them, because as I talk about them, it becomes more active in my mind. And so the next conversation I have, I'm going to be referencing what I talked about. And that's a form of integrity that I want to stay true to, right? So there's going to be slips. There's going to be little mishaps, but you course correct quickly because you have the awareness and you have the dedication to want to be better at this. And just watch your relationships completely change. And if I look at all the relationships in my life, I feel very blessed to have the people that I do in my life. Obviously my immediate family, my parents and brothers, but my wife and my kids. But then after that, like the brothers and the sisters that I have outside of my family that I've worked religiously to craft and cultivate. And the hard conversations that I've had in those relationships and the trust, the loyalty, the connection, the honesty, the collaborative spirit, all this stuff is work. But if there's one area to work really hard in, it's in the relationship to yourself, first and foremost, and then to other people. And those things go back and forth. They weave in and out of each other. You can't have one without the other. But of all the happiness tests, relationships come out on top. It's the most important thing. In health, overall health in lifestyle, relationships. Going through any post-traumatic stress disorders or any traumas, relationships. Like everyone always says, seek out a support system. Well, if you learn how to communicate more effectively, you're going to build more effective support systems. And that's only going to help them and you more. And the better you are, the better the world is. The better the world is, the better you are. And it's a beautiful kind of system. But we got to have the courage to stand firm in the discomfort and to be able to vocalize, to listen, and to seek to understand. So, sending love to you all. If you enjoyed this episode, you want more like this, let me know. I do have a high demand with my personal one-on-one clients, and then just the intimate containers that I have. That relationships is a big one, and communication is they go hand in hand. So if you like this content, you want more of this, let me know. Shoot me a DM or an email. Happy to make more. But send this to someone who you think needs to hear it. And if you haven't done so already, please head over to iTunes, leave me a 5-star review, and just share this with whoever you think would resonate. So much love. Till next time, be your own 1% and go make some magic happen.